Hey everyone, Clio here and welcome to my channel, and today I am doing a book haul. Now, in my previous book haul, which was the first book haul I've ever done on my channel, I told you guys that I don't buy a lot of books and that's the reason why I hadn't gotten around to doing a book haul before. But we are like, I think, only a month later or something time-wise, and here I am again with another book haul. So I want to just point out, I'm not lying to you guys, or at least I normally am not lying, because up until this point I don't buy a lot of books if you look at it on a yearly basis or anything like that. At the moment I'm buying a lot. Maybe this is just me changing because I'm also reading a lot more at this moment, or maybe this is just a fluke that at this point I'm buying a lot. So we'll see. I don't know whether this will be more frequent video on my channel or not, but at the moment I just saw my pile getting way too high, so I had to do another haul. So the first ones are actually books I already somewhat talked about in the previous video, but at that point I also didn't physically own them at that point yet, so I couldn't haul them, and I also didn't know too much about some of them. But these are the books that made it onto the shortlist for the Booker Prize 2019. Now, I started this last year where I bought like the package of the books for the Booker Prize shortlist on the Book People, which is a website in the UK that does like a package deal. And so I did this again this year. Sadly, I had to wait a bit longer this year because of the Testaments by Margaret Atwood, which hadn't been published yet at the time of the shortlist announcements. But I did finally get them 2 weeks ago. So first one I'm going to talk about is the one that I'm currently reading, and that is Girl, Woman, Other by Barnardine Evaristo. I really love this cover, and it took me a little while to get into this book, but at the moment I'm really enjoying it, and I think it's like, it's very weird to say that after this is like the second book on the shortlist that I'm reading, but at this point I feel like it might become one of my favorites for the shortlist. So Girl, Woman, Other by Barnardine Evaristo is we're getting a whole bunch of characters, all black females living in London. We're going through different time periods. So we have current day, but we follow certain characters back through their childhood who are now adults. And so we're looking at different time periods of these people in their lives. And throughout the story, and as the story progresses, we are seeing more and more interrelation, more and more connections between these different characters. And I assume at some point they will form like a whole network of interrelated characters. And it's just a very interesting way to look at being a black female in London. I think they're mostly also of Nigerian descent, maybe even all of them, but it's just a very nice like tapestry of life as a black female in London. I'm so far really enjoying it. As I said in the beginning, it was difficult to get into because it has somewhat of a different writing style, so it doesn't use full stops quite as much as you would expect, which kind of gives it a little bit of a stream of consciousness feel. It doesn't go as far as all of that, let me assure you, in case I'm not one who like gets along with stream of consciousness all that well. And so like the first 60 pages or so, I gotta say, was a bit of a struggle for me. I wasn't really getting through it very fast, but once I got into the rhythm of it, I really started liking it, and now I'm really flying through it. Second book on the short list, let me grab it behind me, is Quichotte by Salman Rushdie. It's actually one of the books that I know the least about. I know that it is obviously going to refer to Don Quixote, the Spanish classic by Diego de... I have it behind me somewhere. Where is it? It is obviously referring to Don Quixote by Cervantes. So this is a Spanish classics which I have yet to read, and I might in part I want to read Don Quixote before I go into Quichotte, but I will probably read Quichotte first and then go into Don Quixote. So I don't know too much about it, except that it in some ways going to refer to it, and that it is a Salman Rushdie novel based off of like one of the people that I follow on Goodreads. This was her preferred novel out of the 5 shortlisted. I've always wanted to read Don Quixote, so I'm very happy that I will be challenged. That's through this challenge of like reading all of the Booker Prize shortlist, I'm also finding an extra motivation to prioritize reading Don Quixote. Finally, Don Quixote is like 1,500 pages in its totality, and I'm going to try and read it in the original Spanish. So that's going to be quite a challenge. But so yeah, I don't know too much about this. As far as I know, the reviews has been like mixed, but it seems to be the case for all Booker Prize books. Next up, we have the other one that I don't know too much about, and that's An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. As far as I'm aware, it's supposed to be sort of retelling of the Odyssey by, the Odyssey is by Homer, yeah. I don't remember too much about the Odyssey, except that it's like, what is this? Except it's like, I guess, Odysseus, right, who's like lost out into the, like after the Trojan War, he's trying to get back to his homeland, and he stumbles upon different adventures. I might be butchering the story at all, because this is really just off of the top of my head, and I might be confusing with something totally different. So I guess it's going to be a bit of a story about, maybe about refugees or something like that, or like migration, things like that. But I really am just making this off of the top of my head. All I really know that this is a retelling of the Odyssey in some way. Interestingly enough, as I just see, it is also set in Nigeria, and the author of Girl, Woman, Other is of Nigerian descent, and as I mentioned before, a lot of the characters in that book are also have a Nigerian background. Then we end up with Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. So if you do, like the nice thing about getting the package with the book, like the nice thing about getting the package with the book people is that this is a exclusive hardback edition. It's a hardback edition of a 1,000 page book, so like it was quite good value for the amount of you pay for this package. Now I'm really not looking forward to this one, and the reason is because it's 1,000 pages and it is stream of consciousness. I am not a fan of stream of consciousness. I find it very difficult to get into stream of consciousness. Of course, if Girl, Woman, Other is any sort of an indication of what this is going to be like, then maybe I will enjoy it. I will also say that the people that I have seen review this book have all really enjoyed it or found certain merit into it. It's supposed to be very fun in places as well. We are basically following a housewife in small town America, and that's basically it. It doesn't sound interesting, but as I've seen some positive reviews for it, apparently there's more to it than what you would expect. Next up, and the final book, no it's not. Next up is 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak. This is going to be my next read after I finish Girl, Woman, Other, and it is a book about, basically the idea is that your brain or your subconscious, your consciousness takes 10 minutes and 38 seconds to die out after you've died. So it's basically looking at those 10 minutes and 38 seconds. So I don't know too much about it except for that, but that concept already basically very intrigues me very much. I've been hearing some mixed things about it, but as I said, I hear mixed things about all of the shortlist nominated books for the Booker Prize. Next up is the final one of the Booker Prize shortlist. I already read this and I was not happy. Testaments by Margaret Atwood. So this is the long-awaited sequel to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. It was heavily marketed, heavily publicized. You could, it was like super, like heavily embargoed. Like people who got to read it for review beforehand, like had to sign like non-disclosure agreements and things like that. I would say it's not worth it. I would say don't bother. So basically we're following the perspectives of 3 females in the Gilead society, so 3 different perspectives. Before we had the perspective of a handmaid, now we have the perspective of an aunt and of 2 girls who are kind of representing like the next generation of, who are just representing the next generation. One of them is born in Gilead, the other one is born outside of it. I think the perspective of the aunt is the only perspective that's in any way interesting about this story, but the story is mainly very predictable. It doesn't add too much more interesting information about Gilead. I think there were other perspectives that could have been chosen that would have been a lot more interesting. But a book talk about this subject is coming out, or has come out already in the meantime. I will link down below if it's already out, otherwise be on the lookout for that. So that's part one of this book haul. So this is the Booker Prize part of the book haul. Next up I have a few like random books that I picked up. First up is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This is a Japanese novel by I'm going to try not to butcher this, Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So Before the Coffee Gets Cold, first of all, I really loved this this cover and the simplicity of it, and of course the cat was also part of the reason why I checked it out. But it is actually a time travel novel, and I like time travel novels a lot. I'll be interested to see what happens in this one. So basically, if you go to this one cafe in Tokyo, you have the opportunity to go back in time. However, if you don't return before the coffee gets cold, you will be stuck in time. So very much looking forward to this one. Like time travel a lot. I want to see if they do something new with it. Next up is a classic. It's The Leopard by, here we go, Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. So this is an Italian classic, and I don't think I've read an Italian classic yet. I've read an Italian modern classic, but no classic yet. And so The Leopard is really one on my list. Basically, this is about like the fall of the aristocracy, I think, in Sicily. It's apparently set in the 19th century, second half of the 19th century, and so I just really want to get an Italian one in there as well, because I like to have like classics from multiple cultures in there, and so I'm really looking forward to it. I will definitely also be discussing this with one of my work colleagues, because he's Italian and he tells me that this is mandatory reading to every high school student in Italy. Next up is a book that I got in Dutch, and the reason for that is that I went to an author event in which this author was presenting his latest work and like discussing it and things like that. And the book hadn't been published in English yet, which is very weird because that's the original language. So it was actually published in translation before it was published in English. And so at that point I could not get the English version there because like it only came out, well, it comes out somewhere this week, somewhere in the final, or maybe in October? No, I think it comes out end of September, beginning of October, somewhere like that, and that is the newest by Jonathan Safran Foer. So in English it would be We Are the Weather. So We Are the Weather is another non-fiction by Safran Foer. So I also recently read his Eating Animals, basically in preparation for this talk, and some of his fiction work as well. I have a book talk about eating animals, I will link it down below. But so We Are the Weather is basically looking at the whole question of climate change and what we can do to help change it. I know this isn't quite popular, that usually there's kind of this disparate argument where some people are saying like, yeah, we should all do something to try and help prevent this, and other people are saying the emphasis shouldn't be on our individual choices because we'll never have as big of an impact as like the big companies or anything like that. And I understand that, I know that that is true. However, that does not mean that as individuals we cannot do our best to try and help things. Also, I think that if we as individuals all make an effort to change our consumer patterns and things like that, then the industry will follow, because they will see that this is something that is alive with their consumers, and they will know that it is important for them as a company to show that they also care about this and to take on certain measures to help our climate. So I do think that it is important to also take individual steps and not just to look at like it needs to come from above. So We Are the Weather is looking at like simple ways in which we could contribute to preventing climate change, well, to preventing in which we could help save our planet. Next up is another classic, and this is Frenchmans Creek by Daphne du Maurier. So I've read two books by Daphne du Maurier. I both have them in this very beautiful Virago Press edition, and I've read, of course, Rebecca and My Cousin Rachel, and I really love them. And you know, I read Rebecca a lot of years ago, I guess probably like 12 years ago at this point, and then I read My Cousin Rachel way more recently, but I really want to get into more of her work and also reread Rebecca. So I don't know too much about Frenchmans Creek, but I really don't need to know too much because I've read 2 books by this author. I've been very happy with them. I definitely want to try more of her works, and I'll definitely look into this more when I actually decide to pick it up. So much for my Booker Prize books and for my more random books, and then we have another big pile of books that are linked through a certain topic. And this is a somewhat interesting and frustrating story. So it took me forever to decide which editions of these upcoming books I wanted to have, because I already have them. I have them in a sort of compilation book, but it's very difficult to read from a compilation book because like the book is very big, and so I find it very I find it very unpleasant to read from it. So I wanted the books individually so that I could read them more often, or like so that I would be picking them up more easily. But yeah, then I just didn't want just anyone on any of them. I wanted to have a nice cover for them. And for some reason, I wanted my favorite book in the series to have a nice cover as well. So that was a problem with a lot of editions. So I finally found an edition that I really wanted. I ordered it, but it was not the edition that arrived because this same publisher had a new edition in the meantime, and that's the edition that arrived on my doorstep. In the end, I decided to keep them just because they're quite cheap, and like this way I have a cheap edition that I can just mark in as much as I want to, or I can read as much as I want and not care about like the state in which these books become. And so what I'm talking about is Jane Austen, so the complete works of Jane Austen. I don't have all of them because I already had Mansfield Park on my shelves. I think it's in my previous haul video actually, I had like a second-hand version of this, so I have this edition of Emma, so they are all the Dover Thrift editions. You can look up the previous editions if you want to see like what I was actually planning on buying. So I have Emma by Jane Austen, Northanger Abbey, and then my favorite one, Persuasion. I'm not happy with this edition at all, but yeah. So I'm no longer doing it for the aesthetics, it's the text that counts. Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. So but I also got something extra, so these are the ones that are not the edition that I wanted, but this is the edition that I wanted, and that is the annotated Persuasion. So I already have the annotated Pride and Prejudice, but I also wanted Persuasion because Persuasion is my other favorite book by Jane Austen, so I kind of go back and forth between Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice, but I guess because less people like Persuasion, I just have a preference for Persuasion now. But so, like, it's the annotated version is like this. You have the original text here, then you have annotations on the other side. So it does take quite a bit of extra effort and extra time if you want to read the annotated version, but I did find it interesting to read the annotated version of Pride and Prejudice. But so I do find it interesting to read the annotated version as well, and I hope to be getting around to it sometime soon. So these were the books that I bought recently. I'm trying to contain myself here, but I must say that I'm reading a lot, so I'm also feeling like buying a lot, which is not okay because I still have a whole lot of unread books left on that shelf, which I really need to be getting to at some point. But I don't mind the fact that I'm buying a lot of new books as long as I'm reading them, but I do really want to get a hang of like getting some of these unread shelves read. So yes. But so yeah, that's it for my book haul. If you've read any of these books, definitely let me know down below what you thought about them. If you're excited about them, as I am, definitely let me know as well. Definitely be up for a buddy read if that's what you would like to do. And then I hope to see you guys for the next one. I do not have a fixed filming schedule nor a fixed posting schedule, but actually at the moment I'm filming a lot, and so hopefully I'll also be posting a lot. See you guys.